Thank you very much for inviting me. It's an honor to come and speak at Thali, and you guys are doing a very good job. And I am architect Kosalraman. I have about 26 years of experience. I have traveled worldwide. My bachelor's is from NIT Trichy. I did my bachelor's in 91, that's when I joined NIT. Then I did my master's in the US. I did my master's in the US in University of Oklahoma. Then I started working in Texas, state of Texas. So I'm also a licensed architect in the US. So I have passed my ARE exams, which is about 9 exams. I have passed there and I have a license and I've registered with the state of Texas actually. In addition, I also have a license to practice in India. Apart from that, out of personal interest, I also have a degree in law, so which I have finished. So this is basically the reason is, there is so much of contracts that's happening in our architect's profession. So that helped me to, get interested in the law portions. So that's also I have done that. So I have worked in India for like short time. Sujata Shankar is where I worked initially to start with. Then I moved to US to do my masters. And after doing my masters, I worked in a large company called HKS. HKS is based out of Dallas, Texas. That's where the headquarters is, and they have about 25 offices worldwide. And I started as an intern there, and intern architect, and then just moved up as VP, senior vice president, and a partner there. Then they offered me to start an office in India, and that's when I got that opportunity and moved back to India in about 2007 and set up their India operations actually. So having said that, I started their office operations, went successfully. We had a lot of good projects. Then about 9 years ago, I resigned from that office and I started on my own practice, focusing on healthcare. So HKS is a company where they focus more on healthcare. They are number one in healthcare in terms of volume. Also, they have a good hospitality portfolio. So if you Google, they are in the top 8 in terms of ranking worldwide actually. So I was fortunate enough to be part of that growth over there, and I was able to come and set up their India office here. Before moving to India, I was working on projects in China also, and I worked projects in China, UK, Africa, Middle East, and before moving back for good in India. And of course, my parents are here, so in Chennai, so that gave me an opportunity to take care of them also. That's a loaded question. So to start with, if healthcare is, if you look at the project types or typologies, the simplest one is residential. I am not discounting that, but you start with the residence. If you look at the complexity wise, a residence, then a commercial, then maybe a hotel, and the hospital ranks at the top, because hospital is where they save people's lives. So it's very, very critical. Or any component, the design is critical, the services is critical, and the overall the infrastructure itself has to be properly done. So when somebody wants to start designing a healthcare facility, they need to understand what type of facility they are going to design. So there are various levels of complexity: level 1, level 2, and level 3. So in healthcare, there is level 1 and level 2 and level 3. Where level 1 is almost like a primary care. Just for an example, level 2 is secondary care, and level 3 is tertiary care. And beyond that goes to quaternary care, which is even more highest level. So the higher up you go, the more complication it gets actually. So my first thing would be, my suggestion would be to look at what type of a hospital. Is it single specialty or multi-specialty? If it's a single, it could be a dental, or it could be an eye, or it could be just an ortho, or just a neuro. So this is single specialty. Then there will be multi-specialty, a couple of other specialties combined together. Then tertiary care is where you do a lot of transplants, heart transplant, or limb transplant, or liver transplant. So all this thing comes into tertiary care. Then quaternary care is even further up actually. So first look at what is the specialty you want to design, then how many beds you want to design for. If you have a number of beds, a client or a promoter usually have a required number of bed capacity that's needed. Let's say he's proposing a project in a specific location. This is for a private hospital I'm talking about. So they usually know this is what we are going to do. This is about 100 bed or whatever it is. They usually do a market analysis, or that is called a detailed project report. So they look at it, what is the gap that is there in the industry, which means are there enough doctors to service that community. So to service the community of X number of people, it could be some 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 or 10,000 people. So there may not be enough gynecologists, there may not be enough pediatricians. So what happens is they'll do a detailed project report and come up with a report which says, okay, if you build a hospital in this location, it has to be 100 bed or 150 bed or maybe 50 bed. Beyond that, it doesn't makes business sense for them. So first is a detailed project report that they'll have to prepare. After that, if they have already done that, then there is a requirement, basic requirement. If it's a multi-specialty hospital, secondary care or level 2, then they'll have the various departments that they want to have. And usually what happens is doctors, there is a group of doctors which join together. There could be an orthopedician, a cardiologist coming together, joining hands, so that they could offer the specialties. And sometimes the doctors themselves have a family, within the family they have so many other doctors. The husband will be a specialist, maybe a urologist, the wife will be a gynecologist, then their father might be a pediatrician. So the family itself forms a group of specialties by itself. So once you know the type of specialties or what you want to have inside this hospital, then it's easier to design. So there are a number of beds is first one, then what are the departments you need. So once you have these, if it's going to be gynecology department, then you need to have the supporting services for that, actually, supporting spaces for that. Clinical spaces plus the supporting spaces. So everything comes with the supporting. So you keep adding on spaces to that, actually. Then what you do is, once you have the design, then you have the proper site for that. So my recommendation is to, once you have the requirement, then you have to look at the proper site so that this hospital can be located. That's how you started. I started basically when I was working with HKS. This is a US based firm. As I mentioned to you, that they highly focused on healthcare projects. That is the number one bread and butter for them type of project. So that's why you gain by experience. There are two ways to gain experience in healthcare. One is to specifically do or specialize in your masters after finishing your bachelor's of architecture. You can join masters, where some of the colleges offer specific masters with specialization in healthcare. So that is one option. The other option is to gain through experience. So whereas you start with a firm, work in a firm and gain experience starting from the day one, actually. So my experience comes with working in a firm which already specialized in healthcare facility, large facilities. What motivates me is the level of complexity that provides, the challenges it throws. When you design hospital, there are the first thing to comes to your mind is you have to design for the patient. It's basically a patient experience, like how we call in the hospitality industry. In the hotel industry, they mention as a guest experience. When a guest comes through, they experience the hotel, they enjoy, have a good time and go back. Same thing happens with the patient also. It's called patient experience. So when the patient comes in, they should be able to feel comfortable. So they don't have any high anxiety. So just come inside, get treated, meet the doctor, get treated well and go home happily, recovering faster. So having said that, my interest was more of a complex in nature, because hospital provides the most complexity and most challenge. So it's not only civil, it's not only electrical, plumbing, fire, etc., AC, it's also medical gases comes into place, nurse call comes into place, pneumatic tube system comes in, so many other complications comes into place. So it's basically a living building, I would say, or a breathing building, So the complexity gives me more challenge. So that's why I've got focused into healthcare. And there is also a lot of, I would say, requirement in India today. So if you look at in India, if you analyze, either there is a 5-star or a no-star type of hospitals right now. When I say no-star, which means not even a basic one. So majority of them are nursing homes. So we need to upgrade them. There is a lot of opportunities for architects to go in and help out this doctor community in building world-class hospitals right in India. Design criteria. So patients, as soon as you enter, the first thing, they should not be intimidated. That is number one. So once they come in, they feel comfortable. That is one. So as soon as they come in, it's very clear the orientation. As soon as they come in, they should need to see where the reception is, enough place to sit, well lit places, so enough daylight or lighting is there, so that they don't stumble. And as soon as they enter, they should feel comfortable. There should not be high steps, easy to walk in, easy to locate. The direction sign should be clear, the signage should be clear. They come in there and they go to the reception, main reception, to register themselves first. So that is the first thing. The first impression is the best impression. So once they come in, it's very clearly they can go to the reception and get themselves registered. Yes, just like patients, the caregivers, That's the name they call it as, caregivers. The doctors and the staff nurses, everybody, for them, the way we design as architects should be comfortable for them, which means in healthcare it's basically unidirectional flow. So people walking through, go from one room to another or one department to another in a seamless way. So we call that as a departmental adjacencies. For example, let's say I am coming for an OPD checkup, so I should be going directly to the reception, get registered and wait for my turn and just go to the doctor directly. Or if I have a trauma, if I have an accident or something, emergency, I go to the emergency separately. So if I have a trauma, let's say I've broken my arm, so quickly I should be able to go from the emergency to the diagnostic and treatment block, which is your CT, X-ray and everything. So when we locate two departments, it has to be adjacent to each other. So that's where the architect's role come into play. And there is also, we have to discuss with the doctors, because each doctor operates in a different way, because each of them gets trained in different locations, their approach is different. So their working style is also different. So they will say, I want this particular flow of patients, particular flow of people moving from this direction to that direction. So the departmental adjacency is very, very important. So when we start designing healthcare facility, we will make sure the adjacency to the department is of priority, top priority, so that the doctors and the nurses don't have to walk long distance. So one of the evidence-based design says that there is so much of walking that happens for the caregivers. So they walk too much, at the end of the day become fatigued actually. If you put them a tracker and you find out, they'll be walking kilometers every day actually. So make sure that they walk to the minimum. At the same time, they're able to reach to different points within the department very easily without any clutter. So we look at the departmental adjacencies first, make sure the caregivers don't walk too much, exert too much and become tired, so that they can focus more on the patients. For example, if it's going to be a level 1, it's going to be just a clinic or it will be just a nursing home where you will have the main doctor, just a single consult room, maybe 2 consult room, maybe an observation bed, maybe a reception. And maximum would be an injection room, for example. This is level 1. It's very simple. I'm giving you a very simple basic one. If you go to level 2, there will be some more additions to that. There will be a couple of ICU beds, then maybe a small operation theater. It's a procedure. Somebody maybe broke his fingers, so they want to put a band to it actually. So that might be a small procedure room in level 2, or maybe beyond that. Level 3 and all, they'll have more operation theaters, more ICUs, so more high-end clinical rooms. So there will be CT and X-ray, more expensive, I would say medical equipments come into play. So if you look at it, the medical equipments are so expensive. So the levels you go up, the more medical equipments and more specialties come in actually. So that is the difference. In a hospital, there are 3 types of waste you can list. One is the biomedical waste. It could be the body parts, or it could be the wasted cloths, blood stained cloths and all those things. Number 2 is laundry, and number 3 is instruments. So these are 3 items. So the instruments goes to a cleaning equipment room called the CSSD, Central Sterile Department actually. They go and sterilize the instruments to bring it back to the operation theater. Then the laundry goes to the laundry. So whichever soiled one, laundry goes to the laundry. And the biomedical waste, they call it as a BMW, that goes separately. It's actually bagged and tagged. So they have their own system of biomedical waste norms, where all this biomedical waste is put in a bag, color coded and tagged, and will be taken through the service corridor to the outside, to the back side or wherever. So the law says there should be a designated biomedical waste storage area. So you, as an architect, we need to create that in the backyard or in the setback area, so that it's away from the building, it doesn't smell, so that it can be properly disposed of. And they have, usually the hospital has contracts with the biomedical disposal agencies. They come back, pick it up and go, but we have to make sure we provide a space for the truck to back up, pick up all the biomedical waste and take it outside. The immediate one is non-slippery floors actually, so anti-skid floors. So what happens is, many times the floor is a one which is very slippery, and the fall ratio or the number of falls of patients is very high actually. So when they fall on the hard surface, it even more affects them, and particularly aged people. So it should be a non-skid or anti-skid, they would say. It's surface which is on the floor and no sharp corners. So easy to walk, so no steps, as much as possible we give ramp and everything. And in terms of signage, it really helps out. So I'm not well as a patient, I go to this hospital, I'm not sure sometimes which floor I am in actually, and I also have some color blindness sometimes. So you have to address all those things actually for safety of the patients actually. So what we typically do is, sometimes we give the color code at the stairs or at the lift lobby, so that each lobby will have a different colors. Maybe one is pastel green, one is pastel yellow, or one is pastel blue. So if I am on the right floor, if it's on the second floor, I give a good specific color to that, so that it's easy to identify that floor. So that's where we have safety definitely. And in terms of corridors and all those things, we have grab bars to hold on to and just walk on in the corridors actually. So these are some of the few safety we incorporate in the design actually. See, after COVID, the only thing that have changed much in my perception fully is mask, hand hygiene and social distancing. Okay, this is the main thing that prevents a spread of disease quickly. But at the hospital level, they have added some more layers to that, So in terms of housekeeping, definitely they have done. In terms of more airlocks, which means, instead of before going into an ICU, they have an anti-space or an airlock. So making sure that it has a negative pressure. So this means, you don't any air from the outside doesn't pass through that airlock into the ICU. So they kind of block that and has a negative pressure. So any air in that airlock gets sucked out actually. So there is a negative pressure created, and ICU has a positive pressure. So always the air flows outside the ICU, it doesn't go inside. So this is one way, and also isolating the wings actually. So that they have done. So what they have done is this wing is dedicated for maybe certain pandemics actually. So that they have done. They have added more air exchanges to the existing systems. So these are some of the key things that they have done post COVID actually. Okay. See, what happens is investing in a hospital is a very high. Investing in a hospital is a very expensive proposition. It's a very high capital intensive project types. So you have to really pitch in a lot of money upfront to build a multi-specialty hospital, and it takes many years for the ROI to come in actually. So having said that, this COVID has helped a lot of doctors, make sure they are able to generate a lot of revenue at this point, so that they can reinvest back into their infrastructure. So what they have started doing right now is upgrading their hospitals right now. So any old hospitals that they had, they are upgrading it, so that even a small nursing home has become a micro hospital. So what is a micro hospital? That is a new concept where a small nursing home has been upgraded to a micro hospital, which has a basic reception, consulting room, a couple of observation beds, one or two or a few ICU beds, and an operation theatre, one or two operation theatres. So it's a small hospital, that's why it's called a micro hospital. So all this nursing homes, the so-called nursing homes in the tier 2 and tier 3 are being upgraded to micro hospitals, and that is a way forward. And this is happening quite fast post-pandemic.
Can we look at it as an emerging trend?
Yeah, it is. The micro hospital is the emerging trend right now actually. So that could be about 20 to 30 beds locally capacity. The way I see it is, whenever a promoter or a doctor, they come to an architect and they say, okay, I want to build a 50 bed, 100 bed or 200 beds. The healthcare architect should be in a position to suggest what type of departments it's going to be there in that facility. So the doctors are usually very busy professionals, just like architects, very busy professionals, and they seek architects' knowledge or architects with experience, so that they don't have to hand hold. So that is what is happening today actually. So they seek a healthcare architect's knowledge and expertise, so that if he comes to the architect and say, this is my piece of land, I want to build 100 bed. So the architect would come up with that blocking and stacking which we discussed quickly, very quickly, saying that you need this department, X, Y, Z department, and this is how it's going to flow, this is the grid, and these are the various rooms you'll get, these are the sizes, these are standardization. So he has to come up with the first cut design to the doctor, so then the doctors comment on that. So this reduces the design time very quickly, and it helps doctors to start his project very quickly, because once he starts taking funding, as I mentioned to you, it's a very capital intensive project type. So if he gets the design quickly, he can get the approval quickly, he can build it faster and starts operation, where he starts seeing the revenue. So, see, bottom line, everybody is working hard to make a living, and of course, revenue is very, very important. And hospital is even more important because it takes about 7 to 8 years for any ROI to happen actually. So, till that time, you should withstand, this promoters or a group of doctors who are practicing should be able to withstand that 6 to 7 years of time actually. So, this is where the architect comes and helps them quickly with a design which is a workable design for the code, everything. So, the real constraints, is whenever a doctor or promoter, they go to the field, they go to the, generally just go around and say, okay, I want to buy a piece of land to build my hospitals, immediately the cost of the land jumps up actually. So, they quote a premium. So, right immediately when they, at the inception itself, the project cost, the capex we are talking about goes immediately up because he has to pay that amount. So, that is where the biggest challenge, that is number one, that too particularly in an urban site. So, urban site is always expensive, and once he starts, they want to make sure every square inch is used. They want to make sure, the doctor wants to make sure that every square inch of this expensive property is maximum utilized actually. So, this is where he squeezes the architects, or he basically challenges the architect to maximize the usable area. If you look at the efficiency, it will be very, very high for hospitals. So, that is one, and also the building bylaws for hospitals is very stringent. So, talking about the ramp width is about, previously it used to be 2.4 meter wide, which is about 8 feet wide ramp for going up and going down, whatever that is, and also the ramp ratio is about 1:12. This was previous, and lately about the first week of May, they have issued a new GO where they have slightly considered and reduced the, to about 1.5 meters now. Still the recommendation is 2 meters, but the minimum is 1.5 meters. So, that itself occupies about, if you look at a 30-bed hospital project or a 50-bed hospital, whether it is 30-bed, 50-bed or 200-bed, the ramp width is the same. So, I have been pitching in many of the forums saying that this has to be considered. So, that is the biggest challenge actually. So, the bylaws for hospitals is very, very stringent. So, you have to make sure the ramp is met, ramp width is met, stair width is met, and making sure the egress, or whenever there is a fire, everybody has to exit safely. So, that will be the biggest challenge actually. At the moment, I believe there is not much research in the healthcare sector, particularly when it comes to infrastructure. Everybody refers to WHO or American standards or the Western standards. Okay, so they have done their homework, they have done the research. Whereas in India, if you look at it, the maximum number of gynecologists are in India. Most of them are men actually. Okay, if you look at that, the data is. But that's just for information. But the reason I told you is, many of them have not done enough research in Indian context. Everybody refers to an American or a Western concept where the data is different. The disease pattern is different. What's happening in the Western countries, what's happening in India is completely different. Okay, so somebody has to do some research. If they do a good research, it will be very good actually. One example I want to give you is NABH, National Accreditation Board for Hospital, specifies that all OTs has to be have HEPA filter, which is a high level of filtration that comes through. Any air conditioned air that pumped into the air conditioning, into the OTs, have to be highly sterile, highly filtered air actually, because they are saying that will stop infection. But none of them, there is no paper today which talks about a research paper that is officially published that says that in Indian context. So, there is many such things, there are a lot of research opportunities. Evidence based design is one, where a lot of people can do research specifically to Indian conditions. They can go to hospitals, do a lot of research, and it will really help out in taking the healthcare delivery to the next level in India, particularly with healthcare infrastructure. I don't think we have as of now. Hopefully, there will be some in future. But as we heard, the form follows function. That's very good for hospitals. I really believe in that. The form follows function in a hospital, and fortunately or unfortunately, many of these hospitals are not designed by architects actually. So, it's designed by non-architects or hospital consultants, I would say, who later hire junior architects or architects with no experience or right out of the college. So, they basically dictate them on the spaces and ask them to design something without much experience. As I mentioned to you, hospital is the most complicated project types, you definitely need experience to get it first time. There's no resurgery possible in a hospital. So you can't take an experiment with that. So you need to have an experience to deliver that. And but you can look at hospital as an example to learn from, where some of these hospitals are available in the Western countries as well as in the Eastern countries too. So where you have to travel outside India to find out actually. And this is again two types of projects. One is the private hospitals, and other one is the government hospital. These are two types of project types that we have. Some of the key things is, infection control. I think that is the most important thing, infection control, infection control, infection control. So for example, your hand is so dirty actually, even if you wash it, still there are some germs in that. So there are products right now where even if you touch the surface will have some bacteria, but the material inside that surface will kill that bacteria. So this is very good for, in the healthcare setup actually. So for example, in OT or an ICU or a bone marrow transplant ward, where people go for cancer treatment. These are all, they are highly, vulnerable to infection. So these are the wonderful material that's available in the market today, but little bit on the pricier side, but it's worth investing in those materials, where this is just an example I'm talking about, and there are also other materials in the operation theater area. There are also materials on where you go to the bathroom, even the fixtures have, antimicrobial finishes actually. So these are a lot of innovations have happened in the industry today, and it's up to the architects to go and specify and recommend those products. Budget is the biggest constraint for hospitals. So budget, as I mentioned, is the foremost thing that the promoters or the doctors look at first. They make sure, the capex is easily affordable for them, so that they can manage over the next 6 to 7 years. There are a lot of innovations that are accepted if we present it to the promoters in such a way that, this brings value to them, and they also reduce the maintenance cost over so many years. So for example, the materials I just talked about, antimicrobial finishes, the price is, a little bit pricey upfront, but it helps in clinical outcomes. That's the key word. If it helps in clinical outcomes, let's say a patient coming to the hospital gets treated well, doesn't get secondary infection or, nosocomial infection, I would say sick building syndrome. We have all studied about that. So as soon as some of the patients, they come to the hospital for one infection, but end up with something else. So with some other complications, this is even more dangerous actually. So if all these innovations and suggestions that help, for example, social distancing, instead of one waiting area, you suggest two waiting areas, so that you split the waiting areas. Instead of one ICU, you split the two ICUs, so that you can optimize the ICU. So these kind of innovations, if presented in the right way, definitely it's a good choice that the promoters will accept that. The most challenging part is the operation theater and ICUs, because the infection control has to be the top priority there actually. So that is the biggest. It could happen with people walking in, unauthorized people walking in, walking out. As I said, there is a sequence. There is a sequence to it, from where you come from the room, how you access to the ICU or pre or post op, then the ICU, and then the operation theater, and the same way back. So it's a unidirectional. You go one way, come through the same way back actually. So that is the most challenging part, making sure, there is no crisscross of people. There should be only people who are, who are with hand sterile, everybody is like wearing the proper uniform and the gown and all those things. So make sure, that is the most challenging area in my opinion, is hard to design actually. The context doesn't change that much, it's only the demographics actually. Okay, so demographics is a change, whereas people who are, for example, if you look at Chennai in OMR, there is a lot of young crowd there actually. Okay, whereas when you come to a place like Tenambed or Mylapore, there is a lot of aged people there. So you have to cater to more of the aged people there actually. So that could be the local context, I would suggest. And in terms of requirements, it's all pretty much same across the board, whether it's northern part of India or southern part of India. So it's all pretty much the same. They need to meet the doctor quickly as possible, less waiting time, and get treated and quickly get out actually. So it's always, they're always anxious when they come inside. So that's the only thing. My suggestion is, the research is infection control actually. So we are prone to a lot of infection because of, we don't maintain sterility. It's very difficult in the Indian context because we have so much dust in the air actually. That is number one itself. Whereas in the countries abroad, it's of course the population is less, and the number of people visiting the hospital is lesser. One of the key things, if you look at, there is something called the per bed ratio. Per bed ratio, which means for each bed, how much area you will allocate. If it's going to be US or UK and all these Western countries, they allocate about 1,600 to 1,700 or 1,800 square per bed. Whereas in Indian context, it is about 600 to 800 only per square foot. So you can imagine there will be a lot of circulation spaces in the healthcare facility that's designed abroad, even in Middle East. Whereas in India, due to, as I mentioned to you, due to the urban cost or the of the property or the land, so we are trying to maximize the per bed ratio actually. So bang for the buck actually. So we practice evidence-based design, starting with, for example, daylight, color scheme, okay, then walking distances, then signage, orientation, and all those things. So daylight is one of the key factor, daylight and fresh air inside the building actually. So daylight, in all our facility, if you look at it, you can turn off the lights and still, daylight, you have a lot of light coming inside the facility. Whether it's a patient room, even operation theater, we make sure there is windows to the outside so that for long surgeries, the doctors don't get fatigued. This is number one. If there are 2 or 3 OTs next to each other, we open windows between the OTs. So this way, the doctor not only sees outside, he not only sees the green outside and enjoys the view, but he also looks at his colleagues who are also operating on the other side. So he doesn't feel fatigued. So there is a visual connection, it's very, very important, and with his colleagues, at the same time a natural connection to the outside also. One of the main thing is ease of maintenance over a period of time. So if you look at it, the developers or the doctors, they basically develop this projects, hospital projects, unlike other developers where they develop their project and sell off. Whereas doctors, they build their own hospital, operate their own hospital. And so having said that, once you have the design properly, as I mentioned to you, there's evidence-based design such as walking distances and the colors, then the daylight, all these things once we incorporate inside, the patients or the caregivers themselves feel energized. They start having a very good time. They recover faster because more daylight comes inside. They recover faster and leave the hospital faster. So this way, once they go back home, they mention to other people, because it's all word of mouth, they mention to other people saying that he has a best treatment from this hospital. Yes, so it's also promoter driven. Some of the, for example, if a woman and children's hospital, it's all happy things happen. People, women come there to deliver the baby. That may be the first or second. So there it needs to be more colorful, more touch and feel there. So the finishes provided in a women's and children's care center is different from another hospital, and also it depends from one hospital to another, one specialty to another. So definitely we try to incorporate colors, and we don't incorporate bright colors. It's going to be subtle or a pastel color so that it doesn't hurt the eye of the patient. And sometimes the patient may also not feel comfortable with colors. So we have to take that into consideration also. No, see, as I said, there are good as I mentioned to you, the type of hospitals in India is either 5-star. When I say 5-star, it's not the look and feel, I'm talking about the specialities, look and feel is also there, but in terms of high specialities, it's like a tertiary or quaternary care actually. It's a very high level. It's almost like a white elephant actually. Okay. Then there is also this nursing homes. So in between is very few for the amount of population that it needs to cater to. So we don't have enough in that mid range where it's going to be 100 bed or 150 bed. Around that range, it's very less, and there is a lot of opportunity for that. So healthcare architects definitely are in good demand, but you need to have enough experience before you embark on that practice. So just by providing a healing garden doesn't satisfy that actually. Today if you look at it, out of experience I speak, a patient, by the time they enter the hospital, get registered and wait in the line and come see a doctor, it's almost like 2-3 hours. Okay. So if we can reduce that is a good opportunity for research. If we can reduce that waiting time, so you reduce the waiting area and you reduce the level of anxiety of the patient, and the patient comes to the doctor. When he comes to the doctor, he is calm, and the doctor has enough, only so much of time only, is about 5-10 minutes. So gone are the days where they hold the hand and look at the pulse. So everything is test right now. So they don't have enough time also because there are so many patients coming in. So my suggestion, so what I suggest is, understanding the requirement. So for example, by the time the patient comes and sees the doctor, on a typical case scenario, he or she waits for 3 hours, and anxiety, and he or she is very frustrated and angry at that point. And when she comes to see the doctor sees them for 5 minutes because he himself also stretched too thin. So if we can reduce the waiting time so that the waiting lobby can be reduced. So another thing is that is happening is technology is taking over the healthcare. So healthcare technology, health tech is becoming very popular. So hopefully this will reduce that gap. And we as professionals, if we can find ways, for example, one doctor, if you have 3 OPDs simultaneously next to each other, parallel parked, and we have door connecting all the 3, this one doctor can see all 3 patients simultaneously going back between the 3 consultants rooms. This is an old concept, but we can bring back that old concept and you can catch again, it become very popular again. So this is efficient use of the doctor's time. So you can see more patients. So basically, if we can reduce the waiting time of the patients, I think that is a great thing that we can do. So we can avoid anything like a healing garden and all those things actually. So because that takes a lot of space. As I mentioned to you, if it's a rural setting, we have enough land. So definitely we can have a healing garden, we can have people to walk around and do that. But what happens during a pandemic, still you will not be allowed to go to the healing garden, it will be in stages. So if you can reduce the waiting time for the patients, that will be the best thing a researcher can do in terms of research in that particular field. Designing model, there is not much difference because the clinical flow is the same. The clinical flow, I come, I register myself, go see a doctor, get treated, take an injection and go. So this is the flow. This flow doesn't change with the rural. The only difference is in an urban setting, for each patient maybe 1 attender comes, whereas in rural 10 attender will come. So you need to have more waiting area. So it can be a main waiting area, and all his friends, uncles, aunt, cousins, everybody, they'll come in a big truck. So for them, more waiting area, more lunch area. Basically it's a gathering, it's a get together, it's a day trip actually for them to see a doctor. Let's say a woman is pregnant in the rural area and she goes to see a doctor, the entire family goes along with them. So they take the lunch along with them and they have a nice lunch while the patient is waiting. They sit around and have lunch together. So it's an all day affair. So if you can provide them enough space, so that's the difference between the urban and the rural setting. That's the main one actually. And of course privacy. The rural setting, they have more conservative people. So everybody is conservative, but the rural is a little bit more. So they will want to have more privacy. So which is already offered. As I said, the clinical flow is the same. There's not much difference. So we just maintain that actually. So when I talked about the real gap in the industry, there are 100, 150 bed capacity hospitals are not there. It's not many, a few of them, and it's all concentrated in one small pocket. So the density is very high. As we discussed earlier, people should move out of the cities. There are doctors. Many of the doctors, they come from rural areas and towns to study, and they have to go back and serve the community. Unfortunately, what happens, the schooling is not enough for their kids. So it's not motivating them to go back to their hometown and start a practice. So hopefully it will come, all those will catch up. There are a lot of international schools coming in tier 3 and tier 4 towns. So, but the population is underserved with all such hospitals. See, they have to travel almost 200, 300 kilometers. For example, a place like Tiruchengodu, okay, it's a tier 4 town, it's a small town. But nearest is Salem, so they have to travel from Tiruchengodu to Salem to get the same treatment. But there are people who can afford the same cost of healthcare in Tiruchengodu itself, which is a tier 4. So if they can afford that, and if they have a 100-bed there, definitely they will not travel. So for example, they don't have to spend time in traveling so much distance. The tier 4 town, if they can set up this 100-bed, 150-bed, and as I mentioned to you earlier, the detailed project report really, I am confident it will pinpoint saying that either a 50 or 100-bed is definitely needed to cater to the population. Again, it's a demographics, a disease pattern that's there prevalent in certain areas. For example, they'll have a lot of requirement for kidney ailments in certain locations because there are so much factories and quarries close by. So to cater to those kind of, as I said, so geriatrics is one, pediatrics is one, that depends on the local population there actually. So that really helps out. So this is where that gap is, and if we can fill that gap, I think there is a lot of opportunities to do that actually. For a student to get involved with healthcare projects or to get into the healthcare design, if they are in the fourth or the fifth year, the thesis topic they could select is a healthcare project. Healthcare project, that a sizable healthcare project, not a huge one, the sizable, maybe max of 500 bed, 400 to 500 bed thesis project, which is live is good, if not at least a hypothetical project to start with. So after graduation, as we all do, we have to work in a firm which specializes in healthcare. This is the easiest way to do that, or they can apply for a master's. So some of the colleges offer a master's specialized in healthcare, MArch with a healthcare specialty actually. So that is another way to do that actually. These are two ways they can do. So the easiest way is to join a firm specialized in healthcare and learn from there, because that's where the real world situation comes into play. Masters is also good. So these are two ways I would suggest, and also there is also internet based researches that can be done. Fortunately, unfortunately, healthcare hospitals or hospitals, they are very sensitive to visitors coming and visiting, because one is to prevent infection control. That is number one. Number two, security. Security is a major issue today in healthcare industry, where any unauthorized person should not have access to data, to the patients, and the attenders. So they should be restricted. So that is one of the reason they may not get. And post COVID, it's very difficult to get approval from hospitals to visit them. So they can approach the doctors who are owning the facility, specifically go to them and request them that they want to see the facility. So the best way to see is visiting facilities, understanding the pros and cons, understanding the difficulties the doctors has in operating the facility. So a facility might have been designed 40 years ago by their father, and each of the facility that was designed 40 or 50 years ago would have started with just a clinic. In those days, maybe in the 70s or 80s, I would say, they started with just a single room as a clinic. Then they added on organically. It's like an amoeba. They just add one room. So they had one consult room, then they had two consult rooms. So there is not master planning as such done. So when we as healthcare architects design, we look at the master plan. We know what they want to do in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, and how much of revenue would come in, how much of land they have. So we make sure that we don't utilize all the land. We have design first, then have space for future expansion. Healthcare is very dynamic. Today, orthopedic department may be very popular, but as I mentioned to you, today pediatrics may be very popular, but as they age, some other specialty might be needed there. So it changes dynamically every few years down the line. So the department has to be rechanged, or maybe one doctor who's practicing there leaves, some other doctor comes in. So these are the things that will happen. So the best way to do is, talk to the doctor on one-on-one. And maybe you'll have family doctors also. They can help you out in visiting those facilities on a special case-by-case basis and understand the pros and cons and what could be avoided in future design. That's how you learn it. You learn by understanding the mistakes done in the past. So there is something called architects have to constantly update their knowledge in the specific industry, whether it's hospitality or healthcare, by first is research, number two by meeting all the doctors in the industry, whoever they can meet, and the research scholars, they are looking at the future trends actually. There are a lot of research being happening in future trends. For example, artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence, automation is fast catching up in the healthcare industry. So whereas doctors don't have time to address all the issues of an infrastructure. So this is where the automation comes into play. This is where artificial intelligence comes into play. For example, if you are trying to take an X-ray of an arm, broken arm or something like that, and the artificial intelligence helps you in focusing, make sure, let's say a human being takes a X-ray, he may not have taken it correctly. So the artificial intelligence says, no, that is incorrect, retake it. So the artificial intelligence helps you take it more accurately, more accurate pictures. So this is where a healthcare architect has to be well versed with what's happening and what's going to happen in the future. What are the advancement that's happening in the healthcare industry, so that they can suggest to the doctors. One more thing is happening is the equipments, medical equipments. Previously it's going to be bulky equipments, now it's becoming smaller. So this way it needs less space now. So these are the advances that one has to be aware of and be updated in the industry. On a lighter note, I said, Some of the doctors they call me and say, architect, I want to design, I want you to design my hospital. So give me a design. I said, I tell the doctors, how will you give a prescription without seeing the patient? So as an architect, I have to see the site first, and then I have to give my design. So, but I make sure I see the site first. Then so many conversations happens beyond that. Okay. So in terms of virtual, it's going to be virtual consultation is okay, but unless and until we go see the site and make sure, the doctor might be imagining he's going to build a 100-bed or 150-bed. When you go to the site, there will be so many constraints. There will be so many constraints that you can't even imagine actually. So there might be a nala that's running next to it, a canal that's next to it, there will be a high tension line running through it. So what happens is the usable land area gets reduced. So instead of 100 or 150 bed, he can only build a 50 bed. So this is where a virtual consultation doesn't help much. Maybe initially it's okay to touch base with, but only once you visit the site, then you'll have so many things. At the same time, it could be vice versa also. He must have been thinking, I can build only 50 bed. When we as an architect go to the site, healthcare architect, and we see, okay, there is a lot of potential, and we can tell them, you build a 50 bed now, there is room for expansion for another 50 or another 100. So then he starts thinking, oh yes, right now I have 4 specialties, I can add 4 more specialties to that actually, and he can bring in more doctors. It's a short term requirement, I would say. It's a unique requirement. People who are tech savvy, doctors, very few doctors are tech savvy. Doctors who can do consulting online, definitely we can, as an architects, we can set up a small studio for them so that they can at the requested time, but they also consult in other locations. So technology can definitely enable, but nothing can replace a doctor feeling the pulse or checking the patient in person actually. So for that, definitely you need a physical infrastructure in a hospital, because so many things can change. Because by looking at somebody during a pandemic, for example, he might look normal, but when he goes to a hospital and checks, his O2 level might be so low that he needs immediate hospitalization. So that case, you definitely have to be in a physical environment actually. Healthcare industry, infrastructure industry. So, if you see, doctors are the main players here who wants to build their hospitals. And if you say doctors, mainly in my experience, surgeons, because they need operation theatres, gynecologists, they need OTs for delivery and cesarean sections. So these are the main, of course, cardiologists, okay, because they need cath labs. So these are amongst the doctors, and of course oncology doctors are there. So these are the main super specialities who need real infrastructures. So they can't be doing online consulting. So these are the main key players who are going to build infrastructures. This is number one. There is also, of course, government is another entity where they also build a lot of hospitals. And there is also a lot of promoters who are interested in giving back to the society. Okay, so these are promoters. They have a lot of money based on some previous acquisitions or sell off of their other companies, but they want to give back to the society. They start these kind of trust hospitals specific, So these are the private players, and there are also other type of private players who come in specifically to create a brand, increase the valuation, sell off and move off. So this is these are the major four types of players in the industry. So architects can be appointed by any of them. So for government, they have in-house architects to design their hospitals, which is again primary, secondary and tertiary. Then this private doctors, they employ architects, but fortunately or unfortunately, we also have non-architects practicing right now to design hospitals actually. Okay, who has no idea about scale, proportion, form, space, order, anything of that sort. So doctors, some of the doctors, they go directly to a person who is unqualified, who prepares only approval drawings for this hospital and engages them to design and build the hospitals also. So which is unfortunate in my opinion, where I strongly feel they should appoint a structural architect to design their facility. So once they have so architect's role is specific to doctors, then this private players, of course, and of course this people, trust hospitals who want to give back to the society. So so the architect starts with the design. He has his own team of structural and MEP consultants. We also have medical gas, we also have nurse call systems, and we also have other supporting facilities specific to, like for example, solid waste management, okay, biomedical waste management. So all these all supporting infrastructure that's needed. So this is a whole team of people that's needed. So once the design is done, approval takes enough time, because for hospitals it's a highly specialized, so approval takes time. Then we need to have specific contractors to build this actually, who has the capability to build such hospital buildings actually. And because when it comes to civil, for example, we provide, when we design itself, the column spacings are wider. The reason is wider, as I mentioned to you, the change happens within after a few years. Now this is department A, 4 or 5 years down the line it becomes department B of a different specialty. For that, you cannot have too many columns in between. So once you have enough spacing, maybe 8 meters or 7.5 meters bay, that can accommodate 3 cars, that can accommodate an operation theatre of 20 by 20, that can accommodate 2 patient rooms next to each other. So it's become modular. So once it becomes modular, you can do anything. So our design is mostly modular, and it's very flexible to change the use to different department in the future actually. Specific design is, I would say, when designing a multi-specialty hospital, this waiting, primary waiting, secondary waiting. So we designed a hospital in a tier 3 town actually, where, as I mentioned to you, there will be a lot of people, attenders coming together. So we made sure, we have 2 waitings, main waiting with consultants room. This is one pod, we call it as a pod or a cluster. Then again one more secondary to that. So this way you distribute the crowd actually. So there is no cross infection, or you can reduce it actually, so that it's spread out between 2. And also what we do is, when it comes to ICU, intensive care units, so instead of, we break it into smaller ICUs. So this way, when the load is lesser, when the patient load is lesser, they can switch off one ICU, so that the operation cost comes down. Electricity is saved, light, water is saved. So that is saving definitely on the operation cost monthly. Monthly they have a huge operating cost for any hospital. Light should be on, fan should be on, your AC should be on, your water should be running all time, you have RO water. So imagine, how much of energy is expended in a hospital. So we made sure that the ICUs are all modular. As I mentioned to you, the bays are, structural bays are modular, the ICUs are modular, the rooms are modular, the toilets even are modular. So this way, in terms of maintenance, in terms of replacing over a period of time, even to start with this, to build itself is easier actually. So all standardizing the entire system. One concern that's, for me, that's happening today is, what happens to doctors, they are going to unqualified people right now. So they go to unqualified people, making sure they are saving some money in the short term. But what happens in the long term, they are not aware of or the pros and cons of the decision they are making today. As architects, we can visualize 3-dimensionally. We know what happens if you design a space in such a way that either it's too small or too big. Okay, can they accommodate? Can they make it flexible enough to expand the facility? So we as architects are trained to think 3D. And in terms of, when somebody says phase 1, phase 2 and phase 3, our mind starts looking at phase 1, phase 2 and phase 3 automatic. It's like a visual picture that we get. It's a mental picture. Whereas non-qualified, non-architects can't think that way. So it's a very, entry barrier is so low that they come inside, and the doctors, they don't hire professionals, registered professionals like architects, but end up with these quacks who say that they know how to design, but they don't. So finally, by the time the doctor finishes the project, the cost and the design is, either the design is pretty bad, that operationally they find it so difficult. As I said, the walking distance becomes longer, the departmental adjacency is not there. So so much operating the facility itself has become challenging for them, and the cost overruns is so high for them. By the time it's too late for them to design. So I always feel that it's time that the doctors and the promoters who are planning to build hospitals have to appoint an experienced healthcare architect or architect with a licensed healthcare architect to make sure they design a quality hospital. So that is my biggest concern. I just want to share. Most of the challenges in designing is execution of the project. So designing takes, as I said, with experience comes good design. So once the good design has been arrived at, the architect will have to issue it for construction. So here is where many of the doctors or the promoters saving money, give it to non-qualified contractors, it could be civil, it could be AC, electrical, plumbing, all these guys. So they have to look at the properly qualified, good qualified contractors who can handle this project and execute it, because that's where the cost overrun and the time overrun is. Once, see, there is a lot of, as I mentioned, it's a highly capital intensive project type. So once they start taking loans, the time starts ticking, so they don't have much time. So what happens, you have to finish the project on time. So to finish project on time, you need to have two things. One is have all the approvals, building approvals ready for a hospital, and the funding ready. These are two things. It's like having petrol in your car. Funding is like a petrol in your car. If you have enough petrol, you go farther. So at the same time, you can maintain the schedule. So making sure the schedule, making sure you start construction and finish construction on time, so that you can start your hospital quicker and start treating the patients faster. So it's always necessary, absolute necessary and critical to appoint the right contractors who have experience in building, constructing hospitals, and only go to them and not anybody else actually.